started, who is familiar with the name Frank L. Baum? What did he do? He wrote The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz. Who's familiar with The Wizard of Oz? Movie or book? Movie, raise your hand. That's everybody. Book? A few. All right. Significant changes from the movie and book. What's the biggest one? Who knows? There was a major change from the book to the movie, and the reason for the change is that they wanted it in color and they wanted it dazzling. The shoes. What were the shoes originally in the book? Silver. The slippers were silver in the book. Now here we are in 1930s America. 39 is when the movie came out. Is that right? Or 38? 39, I believe. In the 30s, color movies, color on the big screen is brand new, and here's this book you're going to spend loads of money on, and their shoes are silver. So they changed it to what color? Red, that ruby red. Now, at the very end, last scene, well, not the very last scene, but as she meets the wizard and he tells her what she had to do to get back home, she clicked her heels 3 times. What was the saying she had to say? There's no place like home. Home gives us, the majority of us, I'll say, a comforting feeling, doesn't it? Protection, shelter. It's the idea of belonging and being there. Not all of us have that experience. But that idea of a structure and a shelter and a home and that protection it provides, that is the theme of Psalm 91. Psalm 91, that's where we're going to be in our walk along the Psalms. I don't know what else you want to call it, but the greatest hits of the Psalms, that just seems too frivolous. But anyway, it's Psalm 91. We don't know who wrote Psalm 91. I ran across this fact this week, and it kind of floored me a little bit. It's neat when you go back and you look at how some of the rabbis would teach some of these things, and the rabbinical tradition. And in the rabbinical tradition, if a psalm didn't have an author, the assumption they made was to connect it to the author of the psalm that was previous. And so by rabbinical tradition, in that way of thinking, Psalm 90 is a psalm of Moses. And so they contribute this psalm to the Psalm of Moses, or to Moses as the author. And whether it is or not, it really doesn't make any difference in regards to this. We don't know for sure who wrote it. But the point is, this is a reminder. And here's the key. For God's followers, and that's something that's repeated throughout the psalm. This is a reminder for the followers of God that He, God, is our place of safety, our place of protection. He is, in a sense, our home. And so we tend to know in life the feeling of not knowing where to turn. Bad things happen, yes. And when bad things happen, sometimes it can get to the point of, well, who do I go to for help? Where do I turn? What am I going to do in this situation? Where am I going to go? And the answer in this psalm, the psalmist says, you go to God. And that's the answer that is given. That's the idea. To feel safe and protected, you turn always to God. He is our shelter. We're going to take this psalm, we're going to divide it into 4 parts. The first part in verses 1 and 2, and in a little bit of a change, usually we'll keep these sections together, but in reality, verses 1 and 2, and then dropping down to verse 9 and 10, we have this idea of dwelling. And it's the idea of dwelling with God. In verse 1, he says, "He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him I will trust." Now when we drop down to verses 9 and 10, he says, "Because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place, no evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling." And so the very first line of the psalm, there is something that's going to be reiterated throughout, and the promises in this psalm are for this specific group of individuals, and it's those who dwell in the shelter of the Most High. Those who dwell. There is a clear distinction being made here. And we're going to read all of these positive attributes of being under God's protection. But this isn't a generalized thing to every people. This is those who dwell with God. Even in the first couple of verses, those who dwell, those who abide in His shadow. There is this strong idea being emphasized of dwelling and abiding with God. Those are the ones being referred to who can turn to God as their refuge and fortress. And we've made a lot of comments in the past. That's an image that's made over and over again in these 150 chapters of God being the refuge and God being the fortress and this source of strength. But because He is our refuge and fortress, and here's the point in the importance of dwelling, the last phrase, "in whom I trust." In whom I trust. Now, we live in a world does the world as a whole view trusting in deity as something that's wise? No. Have you ever read any atheist material? Books by Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is an interesting guy. He's dead now. He's not an atheist anymore, if he is. He was one of the pioneers of the proselytizing atheist movement. There's always been atheists. But it seems like here of late, they're trying to convert others to atheism. And as a result, they have written a lot of books here of late, articles, interviews. And Richard Dawkins is one of the big names. And if you read any atheist material, his included, one of their biggest arguments is, if there is a God, then why what? What is it? You tell me. Why do what happen? Bad things happen. Why do bad things happen if God's in control? And it's because they have a skewed view of God. The world looks at trusting in God as something silly because bad things happen, and how can you trust in God when He allows bad things happen to you? But here we find just the opposite at play in the words of the psalmist. The psalmist says, I can trust in God even though bad things do happen. Because number one, God's not causing the bad things to happen, but we're going to see about His protection in the next section, and we're going to see why we can trust in Him. But in order to fully trust in Him, I have to be fully in Him. And I have to dwell with Him, and I have to abide in His shadow. That is the key if I'm going to be fully trusting in God. That's the key. You and I both know of individuals who play at Christianity. Let's just be very, very blunt. They sit on the fence. And when good things happen, they come in the assembly and they say, oh, how I love Jesus. And when bad things happen to them, you don't see them for a month, and they'll curse you to your face. Playing at Christianity. That type of Christian has no business thinking these protections apply to them. Those outside of Christ, no business thinking these protections apply to them. The psalmist is making it very clear. Not just this is for you, the Christian, this is for those who dwell, who abide, who have a relationship that is near to God. Very reminiscent of what James would say. Draw nigh or near to God and He will what? He'll draw near to you. So there's a dwelling here, and that dwelling is vital in understanding all of these protections that we're about to read, and all of these vivid pictures. And in verse 9, he says, because you've made the Lord your dwelling place, no evil shall befall you. That needs a little bit of discussion, because that sounds like because you're close to God, nothing bad is ever going to happen to you. Is that a true or false statement? Bad things happen to us all, right? Things happen and it may be uncomfortable. Things happen, it may just shake our very foundation. So what does the psalmist mean when he says nothing bad is going to happen? No evil shall befall you. Here I am. I have a close relationship with God. I'm in His family, but I'm just not in His family standing on the outskirts. I'm close, I'm dwelling, I'm in His shadow, I'm abiding with Him. As a result, no bad will happen. It's about perception. It doesn't mean we're not going to feel pain. He's not saying we're never going to have an unfortunate circumstance come our way. Pain is a part of life. Troubles are a part of life. But it's perception. When bad things happen and my trust is fully in God because I'm dwelling with Him and I'm abiding in His shadow, bad things happen. The bad things, we understand then the reason behind them, and as a result, we draw closer to. The negative circumstances in life can bring us closer to God, make our trust deeper in God, and our faith stronger in God. Those who dwell with God and are trusting in God understand that. And it could be they understand it more because they've already been through it. Think about the bad circumstances that can happen to us in life. What's the worst thing that can happen? Death, right? But for one who dwells with God, who abides in His shadow, what does death mean? I'm right with God now. I'm not just abiding in His shadow, I'm abiding with Him. You think about losing all your money, all your cash, and all your way of life. The one who trusts in God still has hope and a treasure that's waiting in heaven. You lose a loved one, a spouse, a family member, and that's going to hurt and that's painful. But the one who trusts in God and who dwells with God knows that's a temporary separation, and for the faithful, there's a grand reunion awaiting. You see, what the world calls bad and evil, the one who trusts in God sees those circumstances as opportunities to draw closer, to become more faithful to God, because they see still the hope that is there for those who dwell with God and abide with God. So there's a dwelling. We move on. Verses 3 through 8 will be the next section. And here the psalmist talks about deliverance. Deliverance. Verse 3 says, surely He shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence. He shall cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you shall take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day, nor of the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor of the destruction that lays waste at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked. Here are verses that show the protection of those who dwell near God. with God, abide in his shadow, who have drawn near to him. And they're answering the question, why would you want to? Why would you want to? And there are a ton of things here listed. Every single one of these things has to do with his protection and the idea of God as our shelter and the deliverance that he gives his children, those who dwell. And again, everything we say has to be prefaced by this idea of those who are dwelling with God. And so in verse 3, he begins with the things in nature as images to help us out. What's a fowler?
It's a person who catches chickens.
A person who catches chickens. Fowl bird. And really, in this case, the idea in the Hebrew is a trap for a bird, literally. And so here's one trying to ensnare this little bird, and he says you'll deliver from the snare of the trapper, or the bird trapper, the fowler. 2 Corinthians 2 and verse 11, Paul talks about the snares of Satan, that we're not ignorant of Satan's designs, literally. And we know from experience how Satan operates. We know the temptations of life that are there in front of us, and he's very good at what he does. And so we stand and we're ready and we try to prepare ourselves. But here the psalmist is saying God delivers us from that. And it's hard not to connect this idea to 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, which we misuse all the time. We think, oh, that means life's not going to be hard for the Christian, but it's this idea of temptation. That he's not going to allow Satan, God's not going to allow Satan to put any temptation in front of you that you cannot say no to. You're going to have the strength to say no. Whether you will or not, that's up to you. But God limits that ability of Satan in order to protect us. He delivers us from the snare of the fowler. There's also this idea of pestilence. Now, you think of pestilence as a disease that rots away. A disease that rots away. Have you ever had meat go bad in the fridge? And the smell? Oh, it's nasty, isn't it? Ever had a freezer go out and you didn't realize it until you walk in and you go, oh, something's wrong. Pestilence can just rot away. And this is the idea of pestilence, eating away at that which is good in life. And there are many things in the world, spiritually speaking, that do eat away at all that is good in life, or at least tries to. But this is the idea. I stay dedicated to God. I continue dwelling with God, continue to grow nearer to God. And anything the world throws our way, it's not going to eat away at the blessings that are in my life. I trust God for that protection. In verse 4, he talks about, here are these kind of frightening things, being caught in a trap, and the idea of the good things in life being rotten away. But verse 4, we're reminded, God's our deliverer, don't run. Instead, you come near to me. You don't have to run for your life. You just simply have to draw near to God. And it's the idea that God's right there with us. And so here's this image of these protecting wings. Do you remember Jesus looking down at Jerusalem? And he's weeping. And he says, if you would have just what? Come to me, I would have been like a hen with her chicks. And it's the same idea of the wing protecting the babes. Richard.
You hit on it a little bit earlier, too. Most people think that I'm a Christian and I'm living right. Nothing will happen bad to me, but God take care of me. God take care of us at the end of everything. Things bad happen to good people. But a lot of people think that this thing bad happened to you're a bad person. It's not good things happen to bad people.
Sure, there's happenstance in life, but God is still there. God is still there and providentially caring for, and the Christian has had access to that special providence. And that's what's being talked about here.
Don't you hear it preached a lot from some of these so-called preachers? You live right, money's coming to you.
Yeah, the prosperity gospel. And even the prosperity gospel is waning now in popularity to the point of, this is off the subject, but Benny Hinn, y'all know who Benny Hinn, not Benny Hill, but Benny Hinn. He's this French-Canadian preacher. He has, let me tell you something, well, I say this tongue-in-cheek, but it kind of looks like he may have a miraculous gift the way his hair flows like that. I don't know if that's possible in real life, but anyway, he's the one who throws the Holy Spirit. Oh, you people in the balcony. He has this ridiculous accent. Oh, you people in the balcony, you need a Spirit. And he throws it, and all the people in the back fall back. Ridiculousness. But he has lately just come out and renounced the social gospel and the prosperity gospel. And so the prosperity gospel, that's the idea. Joel Osteen says, give me your $1 and God will give you 100 and all this baloney. That's not what's being talked about here. This is the idea of God taking care of us even through the bad times. And notice, he talks about the wings. He talks about being the shield and buckler. He provides a shield, and the shield in the ancient Near East was from top to bottom. But then a buckler as well, that is a coat of arms that will protect us all around. And then he talks about the strength of the protection. He says, no weapon, no time of day can penetrate it. You know, sometimes we'll watch movies and you know, the army gets ready to go in and to invade, and they pick, well, what time of day do you want to go? Well, this time they're really strong because everybody's awake and alert, so we'll go in at night when they're sleeping. It doesn't matter the time of day that the enemy comes at you. God is always there. And that's verses 5 and 6. Whether it's night, whether it's day, darkness, or right at the brightness of noon, it doesn't matter what's frightening you, what you're most fearful of. God's faithfulness is always there to help. But again, the idea here has to be prefaced for those who are dwelling with God. This is specific. This is very specific. When you close out the section, in verse 7, he says, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand. No matter how bad things may get for those outside of Christ, for those not in a relationship, the ones with God are always safe. Again, the worst thing that can happen, death comes. But the result of death coming in this life, to the one who's dwelling with God, you're now in the very presence of God. Bad things happen, but no matter how bad it gets on the outside for those dwelling with God, disease, famine, nothing can break that protection, that relationship. Verse 8, he says, only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked. That's interesting. It's the idea of I'm with God, dwelling with Him, and I look on the outside and I see the bad things happening to everyone. And it seems to be pointing to things like famines, storms, disease, that kind of thing. Now, it's true, we can see throughout the Old Testament God using those kind of things to punish people, to bring people back to Him, to all of this. But that's us looking back. We can't for sure say, for instance, a hurricane comes on a specific area, that's the punishment of God. A lot of those so-called televangelists tend to do that because it drives up their cash flow a little bit, but we can't 100% say that. We don't know. Could be, could not be. But we can be with God, and we see all of those things that happen on the outside, and we can see those bad storms, diseases, pestilence, circumstances of life, whether physical or emotional or what have you. And we see what those have to suffer with who are outside of a relationship with God. And we can draw closer to God in knowing that we're protected from it. Not that they won't touch us, but the result for us will be different than the result for them in the long run. In Psalm 23, David makes a startling statement that really goes against all of what the social prosperity gospel evangelists like to say. You give to God, you get nothing but good, right? But then why would David write, "Yea, though I walk through the shadow of death, but you're still with me"? We walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We'll experience things like that, the negatives of life, but we can know assuredly that God is still with us, even in the bad times. There's a demonstration of this in verses 11 through 13. He says, "For he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. In their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and the cobra, the young lion and the serpent you shall trample underfoot." These words are familiar because they're quoted in the New Testament. Anybody know who quotes them? Do you recognize them? Donald? Satan. Satan misuses these in his effort in Matthew 4 to tempt Jesus into betraying his Father and to misuse the miraculous powers given to him during his earthly ministry. But Satan, just like he did in the garden, added that word "not" as he was in conversation with Eve, twisted the words that are found here. Now, the psalm is talking about God's protection. And his protection for people who are dwelling near God, or dwelling with God, abiding near God, who have come near to God. God will protect his people. And so, when we read these verses, we're reading in a context of a demonstration of what that protection looks like. Now, some have erringly gone to these and suggested the idea of your own personal little guardian angel that sits on your shoulder and will zap people that they come to. This is not what this is saying. As we study angels on Wednesday nights, and as we continue that study, we're going to see that they are the ones that are sent out by God to providentially help when help is needed in the unseen realm of providence. And that is the reference that's here. This isn't the guardian angel sitting on your shoulder. This isn't one. This is saying the angels are at God's command. And just like we read in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 2, he sends them out. When? Don't know. How? Don't know. But they're the ones who execute his providence. And here they're pictured as protecting his people. And really, when you look at verses 12 through 13, this is God simply showing and demonstrating how powerful his protection is. And so there's figurative language here, too, that you can walk on a lion. So let's all get into church once. And let's go to the St. Louis Zoo because that one's free. And let's get in the lion cage. And Don, I'll let you go first. Since you got that brand new bionic hip, you can go walk on every single lion's head. And we won't be hurt at all. Because the psalmist, is that what he's saying? This is figurative language. It's poetry. He's saying, ultimately, in the end, it will be as if, same with the snake. Now, there are tons of snakes around here. Miss Mary's not here. She could bring hers in. who likes to evidently come nap with her at the couch. I don't know if you've heard that story, but Don knows what I'm talking about. But you go out there and play with a nice, cute little copperhead, swing it around your head like a lasso. That's ridiculous, isn't it? This is figurative language. God's protection is as if, showing the strength of his protection, the surety of his protection. Just a picture of how strong his protection is. The last section we can call defense. That's 14 through 16. It reads, because he has set his love upon me, therefore I will deliver him. I will set him on high because he has known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. A lot of times in the Psalms, and I hope you are noticing this as we go through some of these chapters, the voice of the speaker changes. You'll see pronouns begin to change. He, I. Or he, you. See that in Psalm 23. David's talking about the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. And then halfway through he says, you. And so he's talking to a crowd, but then everything he's saying is overwhelming him to the point he has to talk to God directly. The voice changes here in this last section. The psalmist has been talking about God. And now the voice changes, and it's as if God himself is speaking. Notice he's saying, I. It switches to first person. And so here is God himself saying, I will protect you. And this verifies three things that we've been saying all along. Because three times in this verse, in this passage, God makes it clear that his promise of protection is not for everyone. Look at what he says. He has set his love upon me. He has known my name. He shall call upon me. As a result, I will deliver. I will set him on high. I will answer. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. Those are special protections for those who are dwelling with God, who are abiding near God in his shadow, and who are continually striving to be with God. And what we can expect as one who does that, you see the basic protection that God gives. But then he goes a step further. Because yes, God can protect, but then he can go a step further. And it's not just a refuge we find for the negative times of life. It goes a step further, and he says he provides even more than just that protection. He calls me, I'm going to answer. I'll be with him in trouble. I'll rescue him and honor him. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. You know, if he just stopped with, I will rescue him, that's the protection of God for his special people. And okay, that's enough. But he goes even further than that to show how strong his defense is. Not just that he'll be with us through times of difficulty, but in the ultimate, he will honor us, lift us up literally, and bring salvation. We sing a song that really goes to the very theme of what the psalmist says here. There is a place of quiet rest. Where? Near to the heart of God. A place where sin cannot molest. Where? Near to the heart of God. We need to be resolved as people of God to not just desire to dwell with God, but to put it into practice. and realize God is our shelter. And it's when we dwell with God, it's when we abide in the shadow of his wings, when we know him as our shelter and protector, that is when we can live life full of peace, knowing our protection comes from our loving, all-powerful God. All right. We'll stop there for the... Yes?
All this reminds me of a song. Life is easy. We're on the mountain. Then we're down in the valley. That's where faith is.
That's where the rubber meets the road. Next week, Lord willing, we'll be in Psalm 95.